Hello and welcome to the course on strategy. Now what we're going to be discussing is integration. And this is the idea of as you expand your company, how do you go? You can integrate, you can diversify, you can internationalize. The focus for today is going to be on integration, and the agenda, what we're going to be discussing is what is vertical integration, what are the different types of vertical integration, and then the debate and the question, and this is where the strategy comes in on thinking about vertical integration. In which situations should we think about going into other segments of the industry value chain? In which situations that might not be the best thing? And then the process, how do we think strategically? What are the different steps to basically, eventually, if everything goes well, integrate successfully? So let's start with vertical integration. What is this? Relatively simple. We're expanding within the industry value chain. Different segments, companies can basically locate in all these segments. Some of them choose to control multiple segments, others choose to specialize. This links back to the discussion on the value chain. And here, what I want to do is clarify the distinction between the company value chain and the industry value chain. To some extent, they are related, but the notion here is you take a company and then we have primary and secondary activities, and we try to understand how those primary activities is input, output, things come into the company, inbound logistics, we do something about them, we manufacture, we recreate, we improve, we send them outbound logistics, we sell them, and then private service. This is within company, these are the set of activities within the company, which is related to the industry value chain, in which we're looking at the sequence of activities all the way from the early raw materials to the final user of the products or services. How do we understand this? Let's look for the raw materials, find them, extract them, process, transport, process them, then come and create parts, components, systems that then go into the product, that then basically get distributed to other places, that then go into the retail, and then eventually, and this is the important thing, might end up with the recycling, so that we, in some cases, have a full cycle. They are related within company, across industry. The question here is the choice of companies. Do we specialize in only one segment of the value chain within the industry, or do we go and coordinate multiple segments? With this, we have two different types. Backward integration, I start in this particular segment, and then I decide to go backwards into my supply chain. I get into the direct suppliers, their suppliers, and maybe all the way into raw materials. Or alternatively, I decide to go closer to final customers, and I push into distribution, I push into retail, I push into direct contact with the customers. And of course, we can, in some cases, control the whole thing. With this, let's talk about one example. And this basically might be able to illustrate ideas better. Oil and gas, really complex industry, so this is an oversimplification, but to some extent, we are looking for exploration of oil and gas. They tend to be together under the ground. And from there, they, to some extent, might follow two different chains. In the case of natural gas, extraction, production, then transportation. We can process it into different components and then maybe use it directly as a source of fuel for heating in houses, or as a source of energy for industry, or it can be used into petrochemicals. Alternative story with oil. We explore for it, we find it, and we extract it, we do transport it, and then we get into the refining and the creation of products that then get distributed, and in some cases directly used for consumers as gasoline or fuel for the heating their homes. In other cases, indirect plastics and things like this. So this is the overall story. This is the overall value chain. If we go slightly deeper, what happens? We take the barrel of oil, we crack it. I mean, this is refining, this is petrochemicals. And then depending on if you want it's composed of lots of different chemicals. And as we basically have different points of lightness of those chemicals, we can separate them And what we end up is of a typical barrel of oil, different sets of components that then can be used in many different alternative options. This is just an example. It's a nice illustration from one single barrel of oil. What do we get? Well, a lot of fuel for if you want heavier transport, lighter transport for automobiles. Yes, we also have some electricity generated from burning some of that towards chemicals, traditional chemicals, and also if you want more applied one plastics, drinking cups, polyester shirts, things like this. The notion here is can become a really complex value chain, which is illustrated here. And this is coming from the Department of Energy, all the way from the raw materials in the petrochemical industry to the final products. Yes, lots of, if you want, going back to your M classes. And the notion here is oil can have multiple different uses, and the question is companies choose to participate in different segments. So going into this example, this is an example of different companies that have chosen to vertical integrate in different ways. The notion here is this is company choice. It's not an industry choice, it's a company choice. Here, resources, it's an oil and gas exploration, pretty much. That's the only thing they do. ConocoPhillips, they also get farther into midstream. Kinder Morgan focuses on pipelines. Valero, it's pipelines and also refining. BP, ExxonMobil, they are only majors, which in many cases are considered to be companies that are fully vertically integrated from exploration, production, refining, and then distribution and marketing. In other cases, we also have companies that are fully integrated, although most of their focus tends to be on chemicals, as for example, BASF. And then others, then the Basel is in plastics, Dow Chemical, it's just mostly on the chemical, it's getting products from others, and they concentrate on chemicals and niche products, and then some are very specialized products still out there. Yes, we consider it as cosmetics, but those are basically chemical products, and the same thing as biochem with a Sigma Aldrich. Then illustration here, this is choices. Companies choose to basically vertically integrate in different segments. Why is this? How do we understand this? The logic here is going to be a story of markets. And underlying this is a particular theory, transaction cost economics, which the notion is concerns about somebody exerting opportunism, exerting power over us because there are imperfections in the way we interact, and therefore what we want to do is try to prevent this misbehavior by taking control of those transactions. That's a very simplified analysis of that theory. The important thing that I'd like you to remember is two main approaches to this. One is a story of market failure. There are very few buyers and sellers. You have to continuously renegotiate with them. Asset specificity, which means that maybe your site, the technology, the technical, human capital, there are investments that are going to create a lot of value for this particular relationship and have a very limited secondary value for another one. So therefore, there is an incentive or disincentive if we are separated not to invest. The more we have a lot of transaction frequency, the more we have to renegotiate. So there is an incentive to basically integrate things here. And if there is a lot of uncertainty, inability to fully comprehend information and potential for opportunism, there is going to be an incentive to basically going back and integrate. So the notion here is markets are not perfect. There are several market failures. If there is a relatively good market with lots of sellers and buyers, and there is relatively ease to transacting, the notion here is rely on others. Going to the market is going to be easier to do things. If, on the other hand, the market is not that perfect because there are a few buyers and sellers, you have to invest in assets that are specific to a particular relation, and there is going to continuous transaction frequency, and there is uncertainty and a potential for opportunism. Maybe the idea is try to control those different segments of the value chain. Or in some cases, there is no supplier you can rely on, so you have to develop the market and you have to create it yourself. Another story is a story of market power. And here is you want to prevent others from exerting market power. If they control particular segments, maybe they are going to exploit it, and then they are going to prevent others from entering, and therefore they are going to demand better terms for themselves, or they might control also different sections, and they might basically impose price discrimination. You depend more on them, and therefore they are going to ask you to pay more. So the idea here is, in cases of potential market power, you may want to integrate, either because you want to prevent others from exercising market power on you, or because this is a strategy you can, if you control a particular segment, exert market power. You are the only or one of the few providers of a particular important product, service, and therefore others have to basically take price. And you're going to be capturing some of the value that they're creating for others. When should you not vertically integrate? These are in some cases and given us, here is a story that we have lots of different cyclicality in earnings, and the story of the benefits of diversification coming from a logic from finance. It will be good if we operate in different segments, and therefore there is going to be a smoothing of earnings. The challenge to that particular argument in vertical integration is because these segments are connected. If there is a drop in the consumer demand, that is going to be going backwards towards the other segments of our value chain. So there might not be such a logic and such a benefit of operating in multiple segments for that particular reason. The other story is, well, we need to share supply, so let's go and vertically integrate and control a particular supplier. Yes, if there is market imperfection, not if there is a lot of potential providers, and there is going to be a benefit to basically specializing, and the notion that why do you need to be your own supplier when there is plenty of supply there? And then the idea, and this kind of an interesting story, you can capture more value because, look, your supplier is adding a margin to their costs, so therefore you are going to capture that margin, and you are going to be able to make money out of that, reduce your costs. But of course, that doesn't take into account that, yes, you're going forwards or backwards, supplier distribution. But that's going to create the problem of you have to deal with the complexity of managing different segments, and you might not have the expertise, you might not have the ability to coordinate multiple operations. There are costs to managing that complexity. So the question is, what is the balance between capturing that value and then also dealing with the additional costs of the complexity? So this might be a fallacy of capturing more value by getting your supplier. So with these pros and cons, thinking deeper, and mostly a story of markets are not working well, and therefore it will be better for us to integrate, or I want to avoid market power, or I want to accept market power, and therefore it will be better for us to vertically integrate. With that, we then move into the process. How do we understand this? If you want a more rational or traditional approach of planning things, let's understand the industry, what are the different segments, how do we connect all the way from raw materials to the end user. Then from there, who is there? And then let's go into an static analysis. Is there a case of market failure? In particular segments, there might be some problems, frequency, asset specificity, potential opportunism. Or is there a story of market power? Somebody might want to be able to exert the market power. And then move into the dynamic. Yes, this is what is happening now, what is going to happen in the future. And mostly because there might be a story of technological changes, regulatory changes that alter this particular analysis, or back again to what is going to be happening in both in the market failures and market power, and then decide how we are going to integrate. It doesn't mean that you can end up with full control. There are many alternatives, from spot markets all the way to ownership. You can get long-term contracts, you can get alliances, you can get collaboration with companies. There are partial ownership. There are multiple ways in which we can decide how to vertically integrate and try to reduce potential problems with market failure or market power. One example, if you are getting into innovation, do you need You're an innovator. Do you need complementary assets? Should you integrate into those complementary assets? Is it difficult or to copy or not? Do they have market power? So it's a story of market failure and market power. So maybe you get into licensing, maybe you get into integration, maybe you integrate and build barriers. So there are different stories. And the logic here is combinations of market failures, market power. How do we analyze this? How do we basically try to get a map of the industry, the conditions, and what will be good for us? So that's the story of vertical integration. Lessons. What is vertical integration? Expansion within the industry value chain. Backwards, getting into the supply. Forward, getting into distribution. This is choice. And this was the example of the oil and gas industry. Some companies choose to operate in all the segments, others choose to specialize, and there are pros and cons for all of them. How do we understand this? The stories of market failures and market power. How do we look at the particularities of the transactions and then try to understand lots of buyers and sellers, low uncertainty, low asset specificity, limited opportunism? Well, let's go into contracts. If you flip these arguments over, let's go into integration and control. And then think about, yes, in some cases, the other story is, well, it's going to be good because we reduce cyclicality in earnings, we assure supply, we can capture more value. These logics might not be that resilient to basically a deep analysis. And then finally, in the process, how do we analyze this? What are the stages within the industry value chain? What are the participants who are there? Because all of this is strategic. Depending on who they are, there might be an opportunity for opportunism or collaboration and reliance on others. Static analysis of market failure and power, dynamic analysis, and then a decision on particularities of integration. That's all. Thank you very much for listening.